I did learn that her first day in office, January 3rd. So anyway, please, I know you're all here to hear Christine, so Christine is all yours.
Thank you.
This is being live streamed, and so I think there's quite a few people doing that. But it's also, Tom, isn't it correct that it's going to be available online, so you'll be able to watch her again if you'd like.
Good morning or afternoon. So I'm going to be that person that says, come up to the front, please. I really want to have this conversation with all of you as well. So for those of you in the back, would you do me the favor of coming up? We have some space up here. That would be great. Thank you. As Steve said, my name is Christine Accurso. I live here in Gilbert. I'm a wife and mother of 3. We've been in the ESA program for 9 years with one of our children. And after Tom Horn won as the superintendent of public instruction, he called and asked if he could appoint me to the position of empowerment, the executive director of the Empowerment Scholarship Account program. Of course, I was thrilled as a mom, but even more thrilled as an administrator and an operations person. And I've seen how it's being run now, and I know that we can do better. So that's why I'm very excited to be doing that. And that will start on January 3rd. So I have a little bit of an overview. There's a few people here that are brand new to ESA. There's some that haven't even applied yet. So I kind of want to do a little bit of an overview of what this is before we get started. But also to let you know if you have questions, we're going to have a panel at the end with our speakers. There'll be some questions. And I will not leave today until every one of your questions is answered. So even if we have to, like as we're cleaning things up, have to go outside, I'm willing to stay until Christmas Eve. I'd like to get home by Christmas Eve to be able to get ready. Just kidding. So the Empowerment Scholarship Account program is about 11 years old. It started in 2011. The state legislature passed it. It became law. The governor signed it, and it was for a very limited amount of people. They originally passed for just special needs, special education. And then over the years, there were more categories added. So this is not a new program. If you're thinking, oh, I'm new to this, and you've been in it 9 years, how's that possible? It's because it's been around a while. But you had to have a category that you qualified for. On June 24th of this year, our state legislature passed it universally for everyone, K through 12. So the only qualification your child has to have is that they can go to the local school, K through 12, and they're eligible to go there. If they're eligible to attend that public school, then they're eligible for an ESA, meaning you can opt out of the public school to choose an ESA. That's the only qualification is K through 12 and be a student, a resident here in Arizona. So when that opened widely, we went from about 10 to 12,000 students on the program to just under 50,000. So from September 30th to today, we've added like 40,000 students. That's with no marketing, no advertising. I don't know how you heard about it, but it might be from one of our 1,000 families that fought to defend this law over the summer when the powers that be that don't like ESA, the teachers unions and all of those folks, when they chose to fight against this law, a lot of us parents stood up and kind of pushed back. And happily, we were successful to see this law come to light. And so here we are, and now it's going to be, under an administration that is pro-ESA, Tom Horn, thank God. I'm pro-ESA, if you didn't notice. For the last 11 years, we've had somebody in that office running it that's either neutral on it or hostile to it. We've never had a pro-ESA administration. So I think January 3rd, it might not be like immediately, but starting January 3rd, we will make sure that this program is administered in a way that serves our children and serves you as the parents. That's the most important. So the number one focus for me, as those of you who have tried to call, you can't get through, communication. So we will start answering the phones. We will start communicating through email. I want to have, I don't know how long it'll take to get there, but I'd like to do a live chat. on the website. So you have constant communication with this office. Now, there's about 52 positions that the legislature has appropriated for this program, and they have less than a dozen or so that are filled doing lots of different things. So I think they're spread thin. The current administration did not hire more people to help with this program. So starting January 3rd, we'll start taking resumes for people who want to be able to help with this program. And we'll make sure that as soon as possible, I've never worked in government, so I don't know what soon means. I mean, I've lived under the government, so I know what soon means. So I'm trying to figure out what this looks like on the other side of the ESA program. I feel like I have a good look on this side as a parent, but as far as administering the program, be a little patient because I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like. So what happens when the legislature said yes to this program is they said yes to the state tax dollars for the amount of 90% that they would normally send to your student at the public school. So if my 7th grader goes to Spectrum Elementary in the Gilbert Public School District, the state looks to see how much do we send for a typical child, 7th grade, to that school district, and then that equals the 90% that gets into the hands of the parents. So if my child has severe special needs, the state doesn't send, they'll still send the 90%, but that's not at the typical level. They would be sending more money if it was special needs, right? Because there's more that the public school would need to provide for that child. So if you're a universal typical student, you might be getting around $7,000. But I know people who are getting $30,000 to $40,000 a year because they now have to go find all of the therapies, the professionals, to be helping in a homeschool, private school, whatever it is, setting. So if you're hearing about people, I know that's a question I had this morning, how is it that people are getting $30,000? It's because they're a special needs student probably, and that's 90% of what the state would appropriate for that child at their local school district. So if you hear different amounts, like well, we both have 9th graders, and I'm getting $7,800 or $7,200, and you're getting $6,800, how could that be? It's because they send different amounts to different school districts. And that's been one of the huge questions in the past few weeks. So just remember, it's 90% of the state tax dollars that the state would be sending for that particular child to the local school district in their area. So I want to clarify that just because that comes up quite often. The federal tax dollars and the local tax dollars still go to the public schools, like in one lump sum. That doesn't go to an ESA student. This is only the state tax dollars, okay? Just going to keep that in mind. Now, all of you were good enough, and those who will be coming over, to submit your questions when you registered. And there were over 4 pages of them. So rather than going through like a typical presentation that I normally do on an overview of ESA, I thought I would try and get to a lot of those questions while we're talking. I see all the heads going like this, good. Because I really want to be able to give you information that's helpful. I did do a presentation here in this hall, July 27th, that is on YouTube, that is publicly available for everyone. So if you want some general information, it would be, you can just go to the YouTube channel, it's just my name, Christine, my maiden name, Sawhill, Accurso. And if you look at it there, you'll see that that's about a 55-minute presentation. But I didn't want to redo the whole thing today because you'll have that available to you. The other top priority for me when I begin this position in January is not just communications, but I know that there are, I'll just say tens of thousands, probably more than that, of backlog of payments. And I've gotten phone calls and emails, even some of you here today shared with me, like we are waiting for our school to get paid. And schools are saying they don't want to take ESA funds anymore because they're not paying. Schools are, one little school is getting ready to close or demand the parents pay them cash because the ESA office is not funding. They're just not processing payments. I don't know the reason why. They say it's because they're overwhelmed and weren't prepared for the huge expansion. All I have to say is be patient, because that's the #1 priority when I get there on the financial side. Communications is #1 to get the phones being answered for sure, to be able to communicate. But I'm going to go look at the backlog the first thing in the morning on January 4th, and I'm going to be able to see the backlog and what needs to happen. Now, if I walk in there and it's huge, it's not going to be in 10 minutes, you know. But please be patient because we need to get the things rolling. I'm an administrator and operations person. I've been an executive director of nonprofit before. Most of my experience recently is in healthcare. But when you're looking from an administrator and an operations vantage point, my brain is thinking differently than how they're running now. So I think things need to kind of move around and change and allocate more people to this department. And you know, it's going to take a little bit of time to be able to iron all those things out. So when I say be patient, it's because there's more than just answering the phones and making sure payments go out. I know that January 15th to the 30th is the next time all of us expect the ESA next quarterly payment. I have to initiate that, and from standing from this perspective, I don't know how that works yet. So once I get there, I'm going to try and work with the people who are there. I know everybody's very worried about the January 15th to the third quarter to the 30th payment. I am too. I'm worried that things aren't going to work real smoothly, but when I get in there, I'll stay there all day and night until we figure it out. So if that's one of your questions, I saw that from a few people too. Know that that's a priority, is to get the money flowing, because that is the will of the lawmakers. We have the law, and it needs to be administered better. When you hear me talk about parents, you have to know that I also mean that in the way of account holders. So there are some account holders for ESA that are not parents. They're guardians or grandparents and things. And so I'm going to make sure that we have an account holder liaison between our office and you. Now that should be all of us working on our team, but we need somebody very specific so that you can call the call center, and if something needs to be elevated, escalated, or if there's a situation where we need parent input, by state law actually says that we need parent input sometimes on certain things, we're going to have that communication. So it's not going to just be you communicating this way, we will be communicating back as well. A lot of people want to know what allowable purchases are. I'd like everybody to try and think about the ESA program as originally intended. That this is for you to take the money that they would normally give to the local school to educate your child. So you should decide how your child's going to be educated. There's a long list of allowables and disallowable, let's step away from that for administration point for a minute. If you are going to spend something on educating your child, then you should be able to do that. This is supposed to put us on equal footing of what's being provided at the local public district or public charter school. There's a lot of charter schools, especially here in this area. If the government's going to fund that, then you have an option to take a portion of that money and fund it yourself. But it doesn't mean you could go crazy out of bounds and go build a swimming pool in your backyard because somebody needs swimming lessons. We're all laughing, but that was like a real question from somebody. No. But at the same time, they came back to me and showed me pictures of a local high school that has a swimming pool. Okay, I get it. But there's got to be a little guardrails on the program. We want to be able to ensure that this program stays around a long time. And we won't be putting any swimming pools in anybody's backyard with this. But the power is in the hands of the parents, but that means also the responsibility is too, right? So if you're going to teach your children, then we need to stay within the parameters of the program, And those parameters, first and foremost, are giving the power to the parents, and this funding is what is the intent of the lawmakers by giving us this option, this school choice, and then finding out from there how many options you have when it comes to private school. A lot of people homeschool, micro school, hybrid school, hot school. Post-COVID, there's like so many kinds of schools. Now, a lot of people also ask about religious curriculum, and I'll talk about that for a little bit. The Supreme Court of the United States, even most recently, stated that you can be using these funds, not specific ESA, wasn't about ESA, towards religious education. So a lot of questions that I have is, can I use my ESA funds to be able to educate my children and actually add a level of religion? That's up to the parent. The state doesn't tell you what you can and cannot teach your child. The state is just saying you have to have it within the parameters of educational materials, curriculum, things like that. Okay. That's come up so much, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it. Every year you're going to get a certain dollar amount, and each quarter, and it's divvied up by quarters. At the end of the year, when you have more funding left, that rolls over to the next year, as long as you keep your account open. And so it rolls over each year. And by 12th grade, when your child graduates from high school, at the end of that period of time, anything that's left in that educational savings account can stay there and be used towards post-secondary education. That surprises a lot of people because the public schools aren't doing that. But you have to remember, they're getting 90%, saving the taxpayers, those 10%, as well as that was intended for the child that account is for. So as long as that child is the one that's using it, they can use it 4 years after high school. Post-secondary, that would mean college, trade school, any type of education that they're going to get afterwards. That's a little bit of source of contention, but many years ago, there were parents that are trying to purchase everything they could at the last minute to use up every single penny before graduating high school. And then a lot of those resources never came to be because the child didn't go to college, this particular example, and didn't go down to trade school. And so all of those funds then were wasted because they bought all of this stuff. So the lawmakers said, all right, let's tweak the law. The money has to stay with the child, but it just has to be used towards their education or books afterwards. Now, after the 4 years, certainly they can just return the money back to the state of Arizona. So the money sits in an account that you can draw down from. They're not handing you the cash to give receipts. So there's a lot of accountability because there's a lot of reporting on what you're purchasing, as you continue to go. So if there's any questions about those types of timing, of course, feel free to ask afterwards, but we'll definitely get to questions after. But it is intended for the student. So in the current third-party system, the third-party financial system that they're being used, many people know it as Class Wallet, and that's the name of it. That's the vendor that's been chosen by the state now. There's 4 ways of being able to use the payment. So those of you who are brand new, set this down. For those of you who are brand new, what that means is once your money gets funded in this system, you can see that amount and draw down 4 different ways that funding. The first way is they have a vendor, that's the vendor area. So you can have a vendor sign up. Maybe it's a private school, maybe it's a homeschool co-op, a homeschool, like our sponsors today, a homeschool organization. It also could be martial arts, maybe they go to your children, do martial arts, a driver's education school, many different things. They can sign up as a vendor. Currently, the credentials that are required, they just load up their credentials so you can see their name in there. It's the swiftest way right now to be able to pay a vendor, somebody who's going to provide something for your child, because you can go on there, choose their name, say you want to give them this amount of money, hit send, and your vendor's already signed up, so they will then send money to the vendor. Now I know that's not happening fast right now, but that's the way that it's supposed to happen. That's the first way that the vendor signs up. The second way is they will give you a debit card. It's locked down by the credit card, what they call MCC codes, so that there's only particular things that you can purchase on it. You can't go to the Bahamas and use it as a resort, right? It's locked down for educational purposes. So that would be one way if you have to request the debit card, and then once you get it, it has your name and your child's name on it. And then you can, if you're shopping at Christmas and Barnes & Noble's got a great sale on a set of books you've been wanting for your child, and moms and dads are frugal, we go and get that on sale. Sometimes you're like, I wish I could. Can you sign up to be a vendor at Barnes & Noble so I can buy it that way? No. You want to buy it right then and there. It's 50% off, so you can use that debit card and purchase something while it's on sale. Get the receipt and then go back and upload it, because they're going to know where you spent it and how much. So you have to upload the receipt at that time. That's happened a couple times to me, where you find something at just a smashing deal, and And I'm like a coupon lady, right? So I just love the deals. So I want to go, and I'm also a good steward of tax dollars, so I want to make sure I'm getting the best deal I can. So sometimes that's a way to do it. So that's a second way. Third way is if you go and purchase it with your own money, and then you get an invoice written a certain way, because the state needs certain information on it, and then you take that invoice and you go back and upload it and say, I want to be reimbursed. Now you're going to have your bank account of some sort, information already in there linked to Class Wallet, because then they're going to reimburse you to your account. I don't recommend any way, but I will say many parents have gone out and opened up a little separate checking account to do that with, because I know that there's been problems with Class Wallet in the fall, and some things happened where funds were coming in and out of people's accounts. Not a good thing. I see heads shaking that maybe you might have been in that circumstance, and I'm sorry that happened. So I would just say if you had a separate little account that's isolated for this, that's probably a good idea. So that's the third way. And then the fourth way is they have on there right now a marketplace where it could be, they have all kinds of educational marketplaces like Staples, Amazon, I can't even think of all the other ones, but anyways, Apple, even Apple because of the computer aspect. They have these marketplaces on there, so you can go into a marketplace like just going into Amazon and choosing what you wanted to purchase. You have to wait for someone at the Department of Education in the ESA office to approve it. And then you have to wait for Class Wallet to fund it. And then you have to wait for Amazon to deliver it, and it just comes like any other Amazon delivery. I'm not trying to imply that that's a bad thing. I was trying to think through all the ways, because I don't want to take any sides on that. But my point is it is tedious. One of the things that I'm looking at. So that's a lot of, but the nice thing is you don't have to upload a receipt because they approved it and they went through the process and it comes back. So that's another way. I know that many people have signed up to be vendors, like even we had a tutor for my son and she signed up to be a vendor, and that took some time. And it's taking time now because of the expansion, but it is really easy to I'll just name you owe tuition for an organization that's providing curriculum, and say it's Angelicum Academy, like with our sponsors today. So you would go in and type Angelicum Academy, and then it would come up. And then you can just pay, and then when you pay that way, it's the most seamless in the sense of receipts and things. We've only had Class Wallet for about 3 years. Anybody part of the program longer than 3 years? Okay, we had a couple. So you remember before, where we just had a debit card to a local bank, you would upload it. A lot more reporting on the receipt side, but a lot easier to spend sometimes. Like it's, there's pros and cons on both sides of things. So the state has done many different ways of going about this, and I'm sure there's many more, and we'll explore all of those in January. So that's kind of the gist of that. I'm sure there'll be a lot more questions on that, but I just wanted to mention those now. So this program is about 11 years old. We have another program in Arizona called the Tuition Tax Credit Program, or STOs. That's where a taxpayer can designate their tax dollars and recommend your child that it goes to. Up to this year, I think it's $2,600 per married couple. This is completely separate than ESA. The Empowerment Scholarship Account is funds that is coming from the state budget directly for your child, and it is put in this educational savings account for you. The other way, STOs, that's when the taxpayer themselves doesn't give the money to the state to give to your child, just is allowed to give it directly to your child and the recommended funds through an STO organization, and then gets a dollar-for-dollar tax credit on their state taxes. These are separate programs, and they'll have to remain separate now. You can't use both. They have to stay separate. You get to choose one or the other. Now for one of our sons, we chose an ESA. And one of the categories that qualifies are siblings of those who are in ESA. So we could have signed up our other 2 children, but we didn't. We just kept one son with ESA. The other 2 children, we did the STOs. So we've been a school choice family since we lived in Arizona. And so then there's no limit on those. So if the tuition, like when they went to high school, was a little bit more, then like what would typically now be $7,000, then that you could, be able to do that up to about 10, whatever the, tuition amount is. So for now, those have to stay separate. And one of the big questions I saw come through on our registrations is, the state says you can do both, but not at the same time. What does that mean? Well, it means you can't do it at the same time. But there's technical things in there that I'll explain. If your tuition is $5,000 a year at a private school, and you decide that you're going to do STOs, this tuition tax credit on the front end, and then maybe the first semester, and then the second semester you want to apply for an ESA, that doesn't mean that they can bill you the $5,000 for the whole year in the first semester, right? And pay it all, and then go and get an ESA just to have the extra money. You see what I'm saying? Okay? What it means is you can't be using the funds at the same time. So if you have a $5,000 bill and $2,500 of it is for the first semester, and you want to use the tuition tax credit for the $2,500, then you invoice it that way. That means you have another $2,500 that's due the second semester, and if you want to apply around the first of the year for that second semester, then you can get the ESA for the last 2 quarters. And you're going to get, typically if it's $7,000, about $3,500 to pay that. Okay? A lot of people were very confused. I think it's confusing. State Board of Education's been. I got 4 emails, very specific. This is how we want to be able to pay. I'm happy to look at those directly with you to see what makes sense. Like, I'm only going to tell you what the parameters are. You have to choose what makes sense for you. We even got a separate email, very detailed, about every month how they want. I love that because I'm such my brain thinks like that. So if you want to go through that individually, I'm really happy to do that. But just so you know, the lawmaker's intent was not to use them at the same time. Will that change in years to come? I don't know. I know they wanted it to be stackable, so you can use both. But then that never caught traction with one particular lawmaker who says, no, I'm not going to vote for it if we do that. And because we only have one member, when it comes to school choice, we have 1 member on each chamber, in each chamber of the majority. You lose 1 vote, you lose it all. So you just can't get it. Just like in 2011, they wanted universal ESAs for all. Well, we just got this year, but they had to fight for it for a decade. It doesn't just always happen overnight. But if you go back, and it's right on the state legislature's website, and watch the testimony, and it's a little, we have better digital things now, but if you go back, get some popcorn, it's kind of funny, and you watch what they're doing. They tried to do this for all students way back when. But the legislature found the willpower this year to push it through for everyone. So those need to stay separate completely. I have a lot of questions. My child just got a scholarship for high school from this organization for $1,000. So I can't use it with an ESA, correct? No, that's not state tax dollars. That's a private organization giving a scholarship. So you can receive that and use it towards the education as well. Just remember, it's the 2 state programs that can't be mixed. Okay. We have a lot of homeschoolers that really love ESAs because they've been struggling for so many years to be able to afford what their children deserve for their education. I know a lot of people very frugally, put their things together, their funds together to be able to help their multiple children. And I think it's wonderful that the ESAs are per student now, so it opens up for parents to freely be able to educate their children the way they should be educated. There's a lot of controversy around that. If you're a homeschooler and you've seen what's going on in the newspaper, just ignore it. They're just trying to say, well, you could afford it before. So since you could afford it before, we shouldn't be giving you these dollars. I know that thousands and thousands of families have struggled throughout the years, and this is a way of opening it up to really give the child the education they deserve. Don't listen to the media. Know what's right for your child, understand this law, and focus in on what's, to helping your child. The affidavit question that comes up every day is a really important one. And I know we were asked many times during the registration process. The reason you can't have a homeschool affidavit on file at the state when you're receiving an ESA is because these are classification categories at the state. So here's the education, at the state. All the kids here are in public school. You have those who are receiving ESAs. And if you're not receiving an ESA and you're not in public school, you have to fill out an affidavit saying you're going to teach your child between the ages of 6 and 16, the core classes. You're signing that up. So they're trying to make sure, for the truancy law, that everybody's being educated between the age of 6 and 16. Okay? So that's the reason why it's up for a classification and accountability. They're not trying to do anything more than that. I can say that because I've watched every single legislative session, every committee, every floor speech. I've talked to every lawmaker that's had questions on that I've had questions for them. It's not their intention to rip the name of homeschooler away from people. You just have to call it something different because the law defines what a homeschooler is. And it's outside of these classifications. So if you sign your ESA contract, it says on there, you are going to be teaching your children between 6 and 16, these core curriculum, these core classes. That's the same thing the homeschool affidavit says. They just put it in the contract because now you're here. You can still home educate at home exactly the way you were doing that before. It's that you're just not called a homeschooler because that's a classification in the law. Does that make sense? Okay, that gets really confusing because your contract, when you go to sign the ESA contract, says you cannot have a homeschool affidavit on file. People take that personally. Don't take it personally. It's just saying we can't count you twice. We have to know how you're going to educate your child. It got to be a little overwhelming when this opened up to everyone. And that's when the emails coming from the ESA office started saying, don't worry about the homeschool affidavit. We'll take care of it for you. I think it's because people didn't know the difference and they had them on file. So they would just work with the county superintendents and say, okay, we have an ESA contract for this one, so take it off your list. Because that's where you file it. I think that's what happened. I'm not sure exactly. But as a parent, I look at that and say, okay, I can't have a homeschool affidavit on file. So I go to the county superintendent where I put it on file and withdraw it. That's the appropriate way. I do think they just wanted to do it for you, but I don't know that for sure, and that's the reason why it happened. But just make sure you don't have two on file. That might come up in the questions, so I'll make sure that we can address that there as well. And I want to make sure I'm okay on my timing only because I don't know what time we started.
I think we're doing fine. I think we're only about 35.
Okay, good.
Yeah, you have time.
Very good. Thank you. And I want to make sure too we have lots of time for questions, but a couple other things I want to talk about. One is everybody's very nervous about the election results for our governor. I won't get into the election, I will not go there, but I will say that the one that is Katie Hobbs, who is currently Secretary of State, who is headed that way towards the governorship, is very anti-ESA. She has been for years. I watched her in the state Senate, always voting no on it. I watched her at the Secretary of State's office stall out this law for us to get started universally. And she has made it very clear in the media and all the newspaper articles just from this week that she wants to see its demise. Those who don't like this program are cheering her on for that. I will say this. This is a law, and we stand firmly on this law of 11 years. On top of the law is a rulemaking process that has to happen to make sure that the law is administered appropriately, and then there's the administration. The law is the law. It cannot change without the legislature changing it. Who won the legislative races in the House and the Senate this time? Could this go around? Our majority are pro-ESA. I'm not worried. I'm not worried, don't be worried. I'm going to have to administer this program. So if I'm not worried, you shouldn't be worried. The rules, that process, I won't get into all of that, but some people know the rules really well, and some people don't, but that's okay, and there's a lot of talk about it right now, because it's happening. When you have a new law that comes about, you have to relook at the rules to be able to make sure that they comply with the new part of the law. That's happening now. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about administering it because we're going to get in there and do the best job we can, a great job, and we'll build an excellent team to do it. How can the new governor say that she'd like to end this when she doesn't have the authority to end it? I don't know. But I'm sure she'll try and make it hard. And with no disrespect to her, I mean, she has been an elected official for a long time. And if she's going to be the governor, then we'll see what she tries to interact with when it comes to the ESA program. But I don't have any fear in that. We are going to abide by the law and abide by the rules and serve the families. That's the focus. And it should be nice. One of the most awesome things about Tom Horn is that is his focus, is a service organization. We're a public service organization serving you. Like I said to somebody a little bit earlier, never in a trillion gazillion years did I want to work for the government. And I certainly never dreamed I ever would. But I'm not saying yes to this job because I want to work in the government. It's because I want to serve families, and a lot of the families that I know. Like, I've been a parent in this program 9 years. You get to learn, meet people online, you meet people in conferences. This summer when we went out and fought for it, we met a lot of people from every single denomination. Sorry, demographic is what I meant. I'm at a church, I thought of denomination, but I meant demographic. You can imagine every corner of the state, young and old, special needs, universal, you name it. It's just been fantastic to meet so many people. I fought alongside thousands of Democrats, independents, this is not a Republican issue. School choice is not a partisan issue at all. Our children are the most important to us. And so this is going to be run in a way that is 100% pushing all politics aside. Because, the media is going to get in there, don't get me wrong, but we're going to push that aside. And we're going to focus on our children and answering the phones. That'll be what we're going to focus on. Because that's why the law exists. And there's no better advocate for a child than you, their parent. So I'm just going to ensure that we stay within the guardrails of the law. You can help me do that by buying things and purchasing things here in the educational space, rather than going on the outside and trying to do crazy weird things that the media likes to report on. Anything that is reported, there will be reports of things that get denied, and that becomes public information. And over the years, that's where the media catches on to it and likes to run us through the mud, this program through the mud. So, my number one call to you is, let's all stay in the lanes of education and not try to go outside of that. I'm going to try and end shortly because I know I'm seeing hands that go up. I really want to answer all of your questions on our panel, especially respecting the time. But one of the most exciting things about homeschooling, and that's why I wanted to say yes today, to be coming today, is I have seen the most beautiful things happen with homeschoolers. So many beautiful stories of children struggling so much, not just even in a public school, but even in a private school. And really watching their parents bring them to a home environment to teach them in that customized way that helps them flourish is why the ESA program, thriving in any education, why it needs to succeed. But homeschooling is of value. I'm grateful for this wonderful homeschool organization that you're going to hear more about. I'm excited to hear more about it as well. The Great Books program. Yeah, get out your pens and papers, lots of notes to be taken. I want to hear about it as well. I just want you to know homeschoolers, in my mind, are not a separate segment of education. Homeschooling is an option, just like all of the others. And I feel like I need to say that out loud because so many people have approached me, even at the grocery store, and said, excuse me, I'm an ESA family, but I'm a homeschooler. Like it's some kind of secondhand citizen or something. I'm like, that's wonderful. So everybody, we need to stay in the lanes of education, but homeschooling is not something that should be put aside. It needs to be brought to the forefront, just like every other thing. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that. The last thing I'll end on is this. We have 4 years under Superintendent Horn to make sure that this program runs well. We have a great foundation of it for the last 11 years. And so if there's anything that you want to be able to communicate to me, either individually or through our staff, we're going to build a great team, please don't ever hesitate. I don't care if you're a parent, if you're a vendor, if you are even a critical person of this program who doesn't like it and wants to see it done differently. You know, as long as we're within the law and the rules, I want to make sure this is running like a well-oiled machine. And we have a lot of other states looking at us to make sure that it's done right and to know how to do it in their own state. So this is a partnership. I'm not like leaving this parent group to run off to the government. Please don't see it that way. I just want to make sure everyone here knows and everyone out there knows that we're going to start serving families and we're going to be really focused.
There are no teachers that love their students more than homeschooling teachers. And you can't be a good teacher if you don't love your students. So kudos to all you homeschooling people. The next speaker is Mr. Thomas Ord. What he's going to do is, now Christine spoke about Class Wallet. That's what you have now in the ESA program. Whether or not that's what you'll have in the future, trying to tell. But Tom is going to give you some details, some more details. He'll also have some slides up here, some visuals that might be helpful to you.
All right. Thank you, Christine, for helping me get my microphone on, because I'm pretty inept without a mirror. So let me see if I can pull my first slide. Just by way of introduction, I've been around a few blocks and done a few things in my life. My military picture's there, but we're not here to talk about that. 29 years in the Navy, but mostly in the reserves. Did a few active stints, but I've been a lawyer during all that time as well. Working with police departments for a long time, running my own, I was an executive director for a public agency in a different state for 14 years. And so I've had a bunch of experience as a lawyer, but I've also been affiliated with the two groups sponsoring this, Great Books Academy and Angelicum Academy, for quite a few years. And pardon me, I'm just going to reach down for my notes here. One of the things I wanted to mention is that as a lawyer, we tend to look at things in detail. So this little magnifying glass is actually not really a joke. It's meant to tell you that we tend to obsess on details, particularly when we're asked by, whether it's Angelicum Academy, Great Books Academy, or thousands of students and parents throughout this country and actually throughout the world. We have students in Australia, Europe, Philippines, you name it. I can't keep track of them all. And all of them are struggling. But one of the things you should all be thankful for is if you're a homeschooling parent or you're just a parent that wants to be having the choice of how your student is raised, Arizona is the place to be. You should be very grateful that you're in this state. We talk to homeschooling parents throughout this country. All of them would be dying to have a law like the ESA. Because when it comes down to homeschooling, particularly in Arizona, the choice is you can homeschool with your own money, or you can homeschool with your own money plus ESA money. That's really the only difference. And so if you're sitting down at the table making the family budget, and you're planning all the activities for your kids, you have a lot more options if you're using your own money and ESA money. And Christine, thank you for clarifying there is no stigma, and there is no difference between a parent who homeschools, who files a homeschool affidavit, and a parent who is homeschooling using ESA money. It's just no difference. It's a mere lawyer technicality. And it's a very simple thing, you already mentioned it. Go to the county superintendent, withdraw your homeschool affidavit, you're good to go. Maybe it's already been done for you, and maybe Christine in the future, that'll be an automatic thing and parents don't even have to worry about it. But it's a pretty straightforward thing. I have too many slides to go over in the time frame that's allotted to me, and that is somewhat intentional, because we intend to provide these slides either, well, through several mechanisms. On our web pages, they'll be available by email. They'll also be available, hopefully posted on Facebook with a link. So a variety of ways to get those, and we'll give you some contact information. Christine spoke in very good general terms about the 4 ways to pay. I prepared some detailed slides with screenshots from Class Wallet that walk you through each of those methods. And I will say right off the bat that the information that I'm giving you is as of today. So that's the process in place today. This is pre-Tom Hobbs, Pre, Christine. I don't want to speak for them. I'll let her speak for what they're planning. But for now, and until any changes are made, the process that I'm pointing out to you is how it works right now. And obviously, I've relied on some sources. Of lawyers, we tend to do that. I've spent, just like many parents, I've spent time on hold waiting to talk to ESA. I think my longest hold was not Christine's many hours. It was 1 hour and 45 minutes. And Class Wallet was generally more responsive, depending on the day, but a lot of hours on the phone talking to both of them. Class Wallet has a wonderful knowledge base that if you can find it, there's a link to it, but it's a little hard to find. You can actually do a little mini search on their website if you have a question on, say, how do I file a reimbursement? They actually have online tutorials that will, they're, you know, the screenshots are a little hard to read, but at least it's something, and that's kind of what I've used here. So I will also apologize. We had some technical difficulties with the projector a couple weeks ago, so the screen we're using is not intended as a screen, so there's some wrinkles in it. But the actual slides you'll get are real slides. Next slide. So, just no need to take notes. I tend to talk fast anyway. Just relax. If you get some questions, note them down. I'm sure Christine can answer them, or I can certainly volunteer my thoughts as well at the panel discussion. You'll get these emails. We have cards in the back, business cards in the back with the email addresses, the websites. We have specific ESA pages on our websites with information that's more detailed. And of course today we're live streaming. We're also recording this via Facebook. We're also separately recording this to upload it to YouTube. So in addition to Christine's YouTube video from, I believe it was July, right Christine? You'll have this video as well as a resource. So you've already addressed the homeschooling affidavit. I'm not going to spend any more time on that. Just to note, there were several questions that were asked about pre-approvals. And there's a variety of reasons why you might want to have a question, whether it's an item is allowable or not. You've looked on the list of things and you're not sure, or you have unique circumstances. There's a neat feature on ESA called the help desk ticket. And it's really the way I would prefer to communicate to them if I had a parent account like you do. Because in writing, you are asking them for a pre-approval, and you're going to get back an answer in writing. And you can rely on that answer when you go later to submit the request, and if someone else who wasn't involved in that communication denies it, you can say, wait a minute, you pre-approved this. And that applies also for if you want to use funding to pay for annual tuition, and it's going to cover multiple quarters. That's something that's somewhat unique to each individual, but there are certain limits on when you can spend your contract money. Expenses have to be incurred in certain quarters. I won't go into a lot of detail now because it won't be able to do it justice. But suffice to say, there are exceptions, and it's in the parent guide where you can apply for an exception using the pre-approval process and say, this is what I want to do, is this okay? And for example, I asked a question, let's just say like I'm a good shopper like Christine, I'm not, but I would like to be, I emulate that. But if I want to pre-enroll, like our academies offer discounts, pretty substantial discounts, if you enroll for next year during the January to May timeframe. And if you want to take advantage of those discounts, well, you're trying to spend money in this year for the next contract year. And that can be a little tricky with ESA. You can use unused funds from prior quarters to do that, but what you can't do is use your current quarter funding for that without a mother may I, without a permission or a pre-approval. And the way to do that is to ask. And when I talked to the ESA about this, the lady I talked to, the operations manager, I think her name was Chelsea, but don't quote me on that, was very nice. And she said, I think we routinely grant those. I don't think that's really an issue, just as long as you explain to us. The trick is when you go to submit your invoice to get paid or get the vendor paid, you need to have that in writing to say this was approved and this is how I'm going to do it. And there's some other things we do as a vendor, and I think other vendors are as well, to help you use different quarter fundings to get annual tuition paid. Next page. Did I skip one there? Let me just see. No, that's it. So, Christine already mentioned there's 4 ways to use funds. These are now some of the weeds, if you will, that may bore you to death. So I'm going to sort of skip through them. Evelyn Wood's speed reading, if you will. And just bear with me. They're going to be there for you as a resource. And I think it's important because the questions I see on Facebook routinely, and even some of the questions we got for this, it was clear people were having questions about these 4 different methods and how they work. So I will cover each method individually with 2 or 3 slides. So first, Christine mentioned Class Wallet Marketplace. This slide is a little hard to read, but this is meant just to give you an overview. You can see the various stores over here with their color logos, and you can search over on the left and do various things to find the store you're looking for. I know we're working to get our curriculum and things in the Class Wallet Marketplace, and as Christine mentioned, there are some, if you will, process issues that take a long time through this, but that's available to you, and that's on your main screen when you log in. After you log into the ESA portal, always log in there first, then go into Class Wallet from there. You'll be able to see up in the upper right of the screen the Class Wallet choice, and you click on that and it takes you to these screens, and you can see Amazon up there. And this is basically the overview steps. You choose where you'd like to shop, you follow the instructions on the screen, you make sure you categorize. And that's something to keep in mind for pretty much any way that you work with the ESA. They ask you to categorize an expense. Is this tuition? Is this a textbook? Is it some other sort of thing? And they have a list of categories that I will pull up. But I will say the parent guide that the ESA puts out annually, the current one is for 2022, so it's as of today, very helpful. If you spend some time wandering through that, you'll get a good feel for what categories work, and it's a long list that I have put in the PowerPoint, but we won't have time to go over. And anyway, you get your, as Christine explained, it takes a while for the ESA staff, that's the team reference here, card is reviewed by the team, to approve it, and then the vendor has to get basically an okay from Class Wallet that it's okay to ship, and then the vendor knows it's going to get paid, and eventually you'll get what you're ordering. Next page. So making a purchase, so this is a screen of Class Wallet when you first get to it. Over on step 1, you can't read that, but that's where you're basically first entering in for your student's account. And then when you get the main screen, which is step 2, shop in the marketplaces in your upper right screen. And then you'll see this is the next option, direct pay to vendor, which is just below on the main screen, just below the Class Wallet Marketplace. And there's a couple of ways to select whether you want to pay a direct vendor. And these are on the main Class Wallet page. When you click to pay a vendor down in the circled area there on the main screen, you'll get a search tool up here where you can search by the name. So if you were to type in Angelicum, it will come up, and you can click you want to pay them. But there's all the vendors that are approved are in Class Wallet. If you have a vendor that you're working with that is not listed, there's a process they can go to the ESA page for vendors where they fill out a form. It goes to ESA, they approve it, it goes to Class Wallet, and they put you in the system. That process can take, I can tell you personally, about 8 to 14 weeks for it to get sorted. We learned the hard way how this works when you're communicating with different organizations, and one thinks the other. The most common thing is the ESA would tell us you need to talk to Class Wallet about that. Class Wallet would tell us we need to talk to ESA about it, and then you finally go, I give up. But then my bosses that I help with this organization would say, no, you can't give up. You've got to figure this out. So, yeah, I understand your frustration. For the direct pay vendor, there's a few more steps. There's actually 7 steps to pay a vendor directly. And this resource outlines it for you, how you do it. You can do this from the title. You can access Pay Vendor from 2 different places. One was what I showed you in the upper right here with the vendor screen, which is a little hard to see here. You can also access the site map, which I'm not quite sure why it's called this, but Class Wallet refers to it as the hamburger menu, which is, I guess, over the side and it pops down and you select that. So either way, you can get in to pay the vendor. Then step 2, after you select the vendor, you can search by different predictive type, sort by letter, whatever. So once you found the right person, you select that vendor, and then you go to step 3 where you upload supporting documents. And this is obviously critical. The ESA is pretty flexible in terms of what they accept. You can send them a PDF that you scanned. You can take a screenshot in most cases and upload those, or hard copy receipts that you scan, you can upload. And it's an easy drag and drop. You just drag it from where it is on your folder on your computer over to that window, and it uploads automatically. This is where you would also upload credentials if, for example, this is a tutoring service and credentials are required, or it's a course subject for which teaching credentials are required. This is where you would upload them. Invoice is really important, and I've seen just some recent Facebook posts about people being denied reimbursement because their invoice did not have the student's name on it. You got to have the student's name on it. You got to have the name of the vendor school. You have to have the transaction date and what the funds are paying for, the category. And our invoices, which I think I have a sample of one, we pretty much figured this out for you. We put up their ESA category, so you don't have no doubt what ESA category to put. You have no doubt about where to put different things in the information, and we make sure student parent names are on there, plastered all over, so you're good to go. The only thing that you need to remember is that on some occasions, for example, reimbursement, if you've received an invoice from a vendor, and then you've paid them from that invoice, and then you want to get reimbursed, you need a new invoice from that vendor saying, paid in full. And we make sure we do that. And you just have to stay. So for example, if you're paying a school or an online learning program tuition, or you're paying for textbooks, and you ask them to invoice you, and that's how the process works, you need an updated invoice showing that you paid for it. Otherwise, it won't get paid by ESA. It'll get returned to you. I mentioned our invoice. This is a sample of our invoice for tuition. And the only thing I wanted to point out in the question with regard to annual tuition, I've seen a lot of these questions, had a lot of conversations. If you're new to ESA, you're not going to have enough money built up yet to pay an annual tuition. Our annual tuition is lower than private schools, but it can range from 1,700s to the 3,000s. And if you've only got 500 in your ESA account of rollover funds, you're not going to be able to take account or advantage of that discount that you might get by enrolling early. So one of the tricks is to save up the money in your ESA accounts until it's time for that, to roll over the funds as much as you can, and then to ask for permission to use, for example, third and fourth quarter funding in this year to pay for next year. And as I understand it, if you submit a help desk ticket and explain that, that's great. What we try to do is help you out by breaking that tuition amount into 4 equal payments represented. So for example, if you're new to ESA and you're enrolling in May of this year, or let's say July 1st is the start of the contract year for ESA. So you're enrolling after July 1st, you have a contract, you don't have any money built up, but you're going to get money each quarter. About roughly $7,000 is what we're figuring for a basic student with no special needs, at least at the high school level. So you're going to get $1,750 per quarter. So what we've done is we will invoice you for 4 payments, if you will, 4 quarterly payments, divided over the four quarters, so that you don't have to pay the full annual payment out of one ESA quarter funding. Does that make sense? And if you're working with other schools, that's what I would suggest you do, is you talk to them, and they should be understanding and do this for you. So that covers step 4, you can add comments, and we on our invoices indicate you should add comments. Basically, as Chelsea explained to me, anything you can do to help the ESA staff understand what you are doing will help them give you an approval. So if you think there's any confusion, if you add in a few comments saying what you're doing, it's a great way. And we have some suggested comments on our invoice for those situations. How am I doing on my time? Okay? You watch me here. Okay. So anyway, so step 5, you choose which purse. And I'm not going to go through this. This is a resource for you. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. And then step 6, you have to choose the expense category. Again, we provide that for you on the email. And then finally, we can talk just briefly about a thing that I've seen a lot of confusion about in Facebook, which is if you're paying a vendor through direct pay, that vendor has agreed with Class Wallet that you will charge them 2.5%, or they will be charged by Class Wallet 2.5%. So think of it as when you use your credit card at Walmart. Walmart has to pay a credit card processing fee for that transaction. Class Wallet's doing the same thing to the vendors who use them with direct pay. That does not mean that you're paying it. It means that the vendor is paying it. What confuses parents is they get a screen like that one on the left, and you can't really see it here, but you put in the amount to be reimbursed, and then Class Wallet deducts 2.5% from that, and then shows the vendor's going to get 2.5% off of the amount that you're telling them to be paid. Does that make sense? So don't worry about it. The vendor understands that's what's happening. Some vendors do want to pass that processing fee back to you. I'm not aware who they are, but if that is the case and ESA has allowed that for them, they tell us on their website that they will not. They will indicate that on the form that you cannot, that you will have to pay the 2.5%. I'm not aware of, I've not seen any example of that actually happening, but since ESA says it could be out there, I thought I'd put it out there. And then, anyway, once you do that, you submit to ESA. So I'm going to end that and just talk briefly about the debit card. And this is in there, and this is kind of the overview. You request it from Class Wallet, not ESA. They ship it to you at your address. It will have the first and last names of the account holder and the student both. If you have more than one student, you'll have more than one debit card. Private schools and vendors can't hold or keep your cards. That you have to keep it in your possession all the time. Excuse me. And then you can see all the transactions. The key thing about if you're using the debit card, you've got to upload your receipts pretty quickly. They limit you to 20 transactions. If you reach 20 transactions with no uploaded receipts, you're going to get some information from them. Eventually, they will close your account. Yes, 3 minutes left. Okay, so I'm going to have to really speed read through this. There's a deadline. It's based on the 4 quarterly fundings. This will be in your charts, and what they can be used for. People, I guess the main thing to point out is that there are merchant codes that are allowed. Each merchant has a merchant code. Some merchant codes ESA does not approve of. So for example, if you're a physical school and you're coded as an 8211 as a merchant code, the debit card is not going to work. It will work if you have a different merchant code and you can request a change. And you can request a change from ESA to add a different merchant code if you wish to a particular vendor. And if that works, or ask your vendor to request a change in their merchant code, and that might get you around it. Also, you can ask ESA to add a merchant code. So I'm going to end with that. And then reimbursement, we've talked about enough. So I'm going to just leave these slides and let you be able to, we've talked about what that's involved in that. Allowable items. The place to go is the website. There's a searchable database of all previously allowed ESA expenses. You go to the main website, you'll see off to the right, ESA allowable expenses. You click on that, you'll get a search tool and a listing. It's kind of unwieldy, but hey, it's better than nothing if you have any doubts. The parent guide is also a good resource. And these are the pages in the parent guide about expenses that are allowed and available. As far as disallowed expenses, the only thing that I would mention is I saw that ammunition was disallowed as an expense. So I'm not quite sure. I was trying to figure out how a homeschooling parent would think that, but maybe you're doing shooting lessons or something, but if you are, ammunition is not allowed. So minor note. And then tuition fees for online learning programs, we've talked about, so I'm going to move through that. Just remember that there are certain credentials that are required for your tutors or your teachers if you're billing, and those are explained in the parent guide. If you don't upload their credentials, there will be a disapproval of your request. Finally, I mentioned the ESA Parent Handbook. Information from today, as I mentioned, business cards. There'll be a presentation that you've seen today that will be emailed to you, and the email addresses are here as well in the address. And the last point that I wanted to make is that there are ES funds, as Christine mentioned. You can use your ESA funds if you haven't used them by the end of high school. You can roll them over and use them for college. There's also an opportunity, and Pat will address that, to save thousands of college dollars by basically getting college credit using ESA funds while your students are in high school. So over to you, Pat.
Pat and I are the next two to speak to you. And what we're going to be talking about is education itself. ESA, as Tom mentioned, you folks are so fortunate here in Arizona. And it's a real means to what we would call the proper ends of education. There are proper ends to education. And they're not always what people involved in what we might call the education industry would say are the proper ends of education. So he's going to talk, Matt's going to talk about great books, classical education itself. There's more than one way to know things. Education is not simply an intellectual pursuit. And just to tease a little bit about what I'm going to talk about, acquiring knowledge is not the primary end of education. It's a means to an end. And I'll get into that a little more. Pat, by the way, another attorney. Can you listen to another one? He's an attorney. He's the founder of Angelicum Academy. Angelicum has been, we're in our 23rd year now. He was a judge in Oklahoma, and they let him escape the state. Pat, we turn to you for, any one of these.
No, I have this.
Oh, you got that, okay.
Yeah. If you can't hear me, please raise your hand and I'll speak up. Thank you, Steve.
Pat, stand over.
Steve and Tom and I have been working together for 23 years, and we knew each other 20 years before that. And and despite that, we're still working together after all this time. And we've focused, we really began this effort when we all had kids about the same time. Between the three of us, we have 18 kids. And homeschooling was something I looked at, because I was in Oklahoma, and the schools that were available were terrible, to put it very bluntly. And so we looked at the options. What did people do around the country who did not have good schools available? And by that time, homeschooling had already taken off. You may recall 1999 was the Columbine massacre in Denver. And prior to that, in homeschooling, the socioeconomic factors for homeschoolers were all lower than the national average. So for instance, parents typically had a lower educational level than the average. There were fewer books in the home. The amount of money spent on education was less, and so forth, and they were kind of looked down on. After Columbine, there was a huge shift into homeschooling from parents above the average socioeconomic level. And part of the consequence of that was they wanted more quality. Because homeschooling initially, in the first 20 years of it, from about 1980 to 2000, was really looked at as a way to avoid the increasingly bad moral instruction in the schools, the bad examples about that, the bad literature, the crime, and so forth. But after that, when it became more mainstream, people wanted quality. So what does quality mean in education? This is a bit of a transition from ESA. This is, when you get the ESA money, if you do that, if you participate in it, what can it be spent on that's, quality? And that's what we looked at, and so I'll just share our experience with you. What we looked at was, since the public education in our areas was not good at all, what we looked at is what needs to be done, what to correct it. And there were three areas in education that were, three errors, I should say, that were damaging education. The first one is scientism. And just very briefly, you've all heard this, you don't believe anything unless it can be measured, by empirical science. If you can't measure it, it's not something you can really know. It's not really true. It's just an opinion. And whereas if you can measure it, and if science says it's accurate and it's true, then that's something you can know. That's actually almost passé anymore because it's been replaced with skepticism. Skepticism simply tells us we can't know truth, or it's very difficult to obtain it. And that's been replaced, and this is the last step, with relativism. And relativism, of course, tells us that all truth is conditioned by either its historical context or its cultural context or just opinion. And so there really is no truth. And that's where you get into all the things like the gender identity problems and all that, because they don't believe that there is any truth. So whatever you think of yourself or anyone else, that's fine. So how do you get out of that trap, which is increasingly taking over our public schools? Well, homeschooling is, of course, one way to do it. It's the favored way now. The latest statistics are something like 5% of students in the United States are homeschooled. So it's in the millions now. It's probably approaching 3 million students, and it's growing rapidly because of the collapse of the schools. But what I want to talk about really was classical education, because if the public schools are all messed up, just to put it bluntly, and you don't want to send your kids there, and now the state, in this unique, unbelievable change here in Arizona, and it's the only state in the nation that allows you to get the money and spend it, well then how ought you to spend it if you don't want to get out of the public schools. Classical education, it goes back to Pythagoras, and he learned from the ancient Egyptians, actually, and the main thing he studied was the language of math. Okay, and that resulted in 4 mathematical studies, you might say, or areas of knowledge, which was astronomy, arithmetic, astronomy, arithmetic, geometry, and music. Okay, and that happened around the 5th century BC. Subsequently, Plato and Aristotle developed the language arts, the language knowledge areas, and that became grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. So you had the areas where mathematics is the language, and other areas where they're called the language arts. Okay, the first one's called the quadrivium, the second one the trivium. Perhaps you've heard of that. Those 2 words come out of the Middle Ages. That was how the ancient Greeks were taught, and it resulted in the Greek miracle. And the Greek miracle is where human reason reached such a pinnacle that we actually haven't exceeded it. And so we still go back, just as I'm doing now, quoting Aristotle or Plato and so forth. That was passed through to the Romans. With the Romans, there was a Marcianus Capella was the one that wrote the book on the 7 liberal arts. So he took these 4 mathematical, the 3 grammatical, and called the 7 liberal arts. Now the 7 liberal arts, this is a brief history, but the early Christians were worried about this because they lived in a pagan society, of course, and they weren't sure if they should have their students study there. And Tertullian, one of the early church fathers, said yes, because we don't have any alternative. This is the only place they can learn anything. But they did it very reluctantly. And subsequently you had Augustine and Boethius and others who adopted a similar attitude. They used the pagan schools to appoint, and St. Basil the Great, he said, use them like a bee going from flower to flower, getting the nectar, but only from the flowers you want. So in other words, very selective. We're not far from that right now, but we actually have an advantage they didn't. You can actually now, in Arizona, create your own educational approach for your own child, and it's funded. So we actually are in a better position than they were back then. These 7 arts, I'm gonna jump a little ahead into the about 200 years ago. These 7 arts wound up being taught at universities. The first university was Bologna, it was 1088, then Oxford, 1096, Paris, 1150. And the liberal arts that they taught were these same 7. Those were taught until recent times in the universities, but also the universities taught other vocational things, like, for instance, philosophy, law, medicine. Okay, that's not the 7 liberal arts. And the point of this is those liberal arts haven't changed because there are things we all need. We all need to know how to speak, we need to know how to listen, we need to know how to add, measure, estimate, and so forth. That doesn't change, but what's important, and this is kind of lost, I think, very often, is people think that's education. So if you learn the liberal arts, you're an educated human being. That's not correct. That's not how the Greeks saw it. That's not how they did it in the Middle Ages. Those are merely the instrumentalities. So you do need to have those. You need to know how to read, obviously. You need to know how to write, how to speak, how to listen, how to measure, and so forth. If you have those, now you're ready to go deeper into the ideas, okay, into the principles and so forth. And where do you get those? Well, historically from the ancient Greeks, it was from the best literature that their culture produced. That embodied the whole culture. So the Greeks did it, in the works of Plato and Aristotle and the Greek plays, playwrights, Sophocles, Euripides, and so forth, and the historians and so forth. So, and that's what they did. And then what they did is interesting. The next generation would not reinvent the wheel all over again. They would go back and say, well, what did Aristotle say about this? Do I have to rethink the whole thing all over again? No, they would see what's correct about Aristotle. And that was called the Great Conversation. That's where it started. It comes right up to our time. You will find books now that quote Aristotle. obviously, and Plato and all the ancient Greeks. That's the great conversation that's carried on. That is the aim of these instrumentalities, is to study the great works of the past right up to the present. Some people think the great books are only the ancient Greeks and Romans. Okay, that's not correct, because what they did, we want to imitate exactly what they did. So if the ancient Romans went back and studied the ancient Greeks, that didn't mean it ended there. It meant after the Romans, then you had, for instance, at the end of that period, you had Augustine and Boethius and so forth. And they would go back and study their predecessors. And when you get to the time of Charlemagne, they went back and studied Augustine. And it goes forward. So you will see that's how we define great books. A great book is one that's part of this ongoing conversation. So if you're at a fiction novel right now, and it's not really connected to that conversation, it's not a great book. It may be a wonderful work of fiction, but it's not something that we study to understand the culture that we live in and that we've come from. So the great books can be identified by this continuous string of conversation going through. So that being the case, what you can see is that the liberal arts have two elements. They have the instrumentalities, reading, writing, speaking, listening, and so forth. And they have what that material ought to be, the great books. So where this brought us was, okay, if that's the case, and it is, when can students study the great books? So we can identify the great books, beginning with Homer, around 750 BC. That's, by the way, when the Torah was written as well. It's also when the city of Rome was founded. So if you want to look at a beginning point for Western civilization, it's about 750 BC. All right. So, and this great conversation comes forward, as I say, and what age, then, should students be doing this? Well, this takes us up to I'm going to go to 1892. In 1892, the president of Harvard, Charles Elliot, he had a great idea, he thought. And what it was at that time, most students in the United States completed 8 to 10 years of school across the country. And he wasn't happy that they were coming to Harvard not well prepared for the Harvard courses and so forth. So he got together 10 presidents of universities, most of them Ivy League, and they said, let's come up with a standardized curriculum in the United States to prepare students all across the country, so when they come into our institutions, we don't have to do remedial stuff and so forth. All right, so they did that, but here's what happened. It changed the whole way education was done, because they set up committees in each area, history, math, science, and so forth. And they said, what do we want a student to learn in that area? And what it resulted in was a list, and it's factoids. What year was Washington born? What was the Emancipation Proclamation? What was this one? All right, and those factoids cannot be found in the great books in a manner like that. So they had to create textbooks. So the textbooks took these lists of facts, and it wasn't sinister, because they actually thought they were standardizing it would be a good thing. And these students would come, they'd all be ready and everything. The problem was you can't convey that information out of the great books. They're not written that way. You may get a fact here, they're interdisciplinary. So the result was the creation of textbooks that we now use in all of our courses and so forth. And they have replaced, in the subsequent 100 years, they've replaced the great books entirely. I went to what was considered the best high school, it was a Catholic high school in Oklahoma City. We read 2 of the great books. That was it. And I've met people who haven't read any of them in high school. And that's just the way American, but we read textbooks. Well, the problem is textbooks convey only factoids, very little understanding. You don't get a grasp of culture, history, and so forth. So that was the origin of the decay of the great books. And now what we want to do is restore it. And I'll go back to that one point. I'm almost through here, actually. But what age can students do this? Well, think for yourselves about your past. When you were in high school, were you bored to death because you weren't challenged, because the subjects weren't interesting, because they didn't have any profundity, they didn't really address the concerns that you had as a high schooler? That was certainly my case. I was bored to death with the whole thing. I didn't know what the remedy was, but that was, and that's the experience. I've been doing this, as Steve said, 23 years. I've spoken to one parent that actually had a dramatically different education from what almost all of us have experienced. So an objection to studying these great books is often, hey, can teens handle this? Well, any teen can read Homer, and it's a progressive thing. It's this great conversation. Any teen can read the playwrights. They can read Herodotus, the histories. They can read Thucydides. They can read Plutarch. They can read Livy, and so on. So yes, they can read it, and we've been doing it 23 years. We can say the primary educational philosopher we follow is Mortimer Adler. He did it for 80 years, teaching it. And in fact, younger students generally are now better because they have not been damaged by skepticism. They believe that they can actually draw truth out of works. So it's very important that they read these works. Well, when can they read them? They're not going to get them in college unless they're very fortunate and they go to a college that has these and they have plenty of time to do it, and most people can't afford that. You're looking at least $25,000 a year on average, so $100,000. They can get it in high school, and that's when Adler found it was best. Now let's look at the Middle Ages, because back then education was actually much more successful. You all probably know the literacy rates in the United States have declined, for the last 100 years, actually more like 140 years. In the Middle Ages, in Toulouse, people entered college at age 10. Now that's an outlier. But what we would consider a freshman was age 10. In Spain, it was age 12. Okay, that's also a bit of an outlier. The main age that they entered college at that time was 14 years old. Now that changed after the Committee of 10 changed the number of years for education prior to college from 8 to 10 to 12. And that's where we are today. That's where that magic number came from. And what they did in effect was they added 3 years of compulsory education without adding any content. In fact, they removed content, as I said, the great books. So you have this now empty space of 12 years, which results in protracted adolescence. And the kids don't get out. They aren't prepared to get it and have a job because they're not educated. They're not roundly educated. And so we now send our kids off to colleges at an age when, in the Middle Ages and all the way up through the 1900s, they're already working and producing and being creative in life and so forth. And we send them there, and it's how our society is structured. We send them there, and they don't have serious studies for the most part unless they're in STEM, and that's usually only part of their education. So it's a disaster, and we all see what's happening. So what's the remedy then? It's to study the great books at the same time they did it in the Middle Ages. You're not going to get as much out of a great book at age 14 as you are at 18 or 22 or 60, but you're going to get a lot out of it. It's not like there's some cliff at 18 or something like that, and then they can study great. No, some students will get a great deal out of it, some students more, some students a great deal. We have students that would knock your socks off if you talk to them. They have read over 100 great books. Again, I read 2. And obviously we have to read and teach them. I don't go in, completely ignorant of what we're talking about. But at that age group, at age time, I had read 2 of them. But they've read all these books I've mentioned. They've read Shakespeare, Milton, Einstein, Freud. It just goes on and on and on. Now, that takes 4 years. We started at 14, same age they used to begin the Middle Ages, in Oxford and the University of Paris, the 2 premier universities for hundreds of years. And they graduate at the same time. Now, the only difference is they don't get a degree because our educational system isn't set up for that. So we went to several colleges. Our students are now accepted in those colleges with up to 60 credits. So they actually do get a lot of credits. It's half of their BA degree, and they actually get an AA degree. That took a lot of, anytime, education is a very conservative body, a lot of turf protection. To get them to change anything like turning around an aircraft carrier, it takes a long, long time. But we have now several relationships with colleges that do in fact accept those great book studies for college credit, even though they're done beginning at age 14. Okay, and that's how it ought to be. That's how it ought to be all reformed. That came largely from Mortimer Adler and his whole life. If you haven't heard of him, he's a very interesting man, and you can look him up. He spent his whole life promoting this. He understood it all. So that is what the Great Books Academy is about. That's what the Angelicum Academy is about. The Angelicum Academy is a Catholic program. The Great Books Academy is used for charter schools. Because previous to this Supreme Court decision, which Christine alluded to, the charter school could not use money for any course or program that had a religious content. Now they can. But anyway, the Great Books Academy is non-denominational. It doesn't have any religious content per se. Obviously it does if you study, if you study any of the works from, from the time of Christ up until current, you're going to get a lot of Christian content. But we don't, in the Great Books Academy, it doesn't have a religious course per se, whereas the Angelicum Academy does. So that's the distinction, if you've been wondering what that is. So that's what we do. We promote the study of the great books. We promote it beginning in high school for 4 years. We promote that resulting in a BA degree, which we're working on. But right now, our students will get an AA degree. And they will have read over 100 great books. And prior to that, they'll learn the liberal arts. And that's the restoration of education. And anything that's less than that may be a very good step, but it's not reaching back to before education got distorted the way it has through various vehicles, including the Committee of 10. So that's really what I wanted to communicate mainly. Let's see if I have anything else here. I think that's about it. One other thing, this is the last thing about classical education. It's often left out. Classical education included theology. The words, it's a Greek-derived word. The Greeks, ancient Greeks, like Plato wrote, Euthyphro, the Phaedo, Timaeus, Aristotle wrote Politics and Metaphysics. These all discuss religion in them and their views of God. The Romans did that. Marius Terentius Paro famously wrote about it. Then there was Plotinus, Proclus, Pseudo-Dionysius, and so forth. They all studied theology. That should be restored. It's been removed, of course. So, and now it can be studied. So, so that's our view of the restoration of education. So that if you do participate in the ESA program, that gives you, I hope, kind of a global picture of the kind of things you might want to look for in a program. And that is, in fact, what we offer. And so if you have any questions about that or anything, please let us know. And so that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat. And I have a few minutes here. I'm going to speak about education itself. And Senator, your state Senator, Wendy Rogers is here. She'll be very shortly here. Pat just mentioned the restoration of education, and he was speaking primarily of, not only, but primarily the means of education. I would suggest there also needs to be a restoration of what the very purpose of education is. What's the end in view? So if I were to ask you, well, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to educate your kids? What's the end in view? What's it all about? It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of work. Well, to know what the end of education is, you have to have some notion, I would say, of what the end of a human person is. And what's the end of a human person? Well, even on just the order of nature, certainly on the supernatural order, but even just on the natural order, the end of human nature itself is happiness. It's the only thing that satisfies human nature. Certainly, this is true on the supernatural order as well. Now, having said that, the obvious question then is, well, who's the happy person? Who's the happy man? Who's the happy woman? Well, our old friend Socrates, that was just talking about the ancient Greeks, he would say the happy person is the one who is good and noble. All right, Socrates, who's that? Well, and this is really key to education. He would tell you it's the person who loves what is good, and who loves what is true, and who loves what is beautiful. It's not simple. In other words, it's not enough to simply know what's true and to know what's good. and to know what's beautiful. Satan himself knows what's good and true and beautiful, but he doesn't love those things. So the end of education, really, from our point of view, is not acquiring knowledge. That's a means to an end. The real end is learning to love the things that we ought to love. Learning to love what's true, and love what's good, and love what's beautiful. Now, if this really is the end of education, there are some consequences to that. One of which, considering human nature, because this is about human beings we're talking here, being educated, it means that in education it's not just an intellectual pursuit, because all of us here and all of our children are not just intellects. We're not angels. We're human beings. We have passions. We have emotions. We have appetites, all of which are good things in themselves. They're created by God. They do need to be ordered and governed by reason, but they're good things in themselves. So, if we're going to fulfill the commandment to love with our whole mind, our whole heart, our whole soul, with all our strength, in other words, love with all our human capacities, we and our children need to have rich emotional lives, rich passionate lives, to love with all we've got. So the primary question in education for a teacher, I would suggest to you, is not how do I help my students to know what's true, or to know what's good. The primary question is, how do I help my students to love what's true, and to love what's good? Now, they have to know these things, but that's, again, not the end in view. It's a means to the end. So this affective side of the human person needs to be taken account of in education. And one of the ways that it's taken account of is conversation. There's nothing, I would say, more fundamentally human than conversation. What do you do? What's your favorite thing to do with your friends? Even if you're playing golf or whatever it is you're doing, you're in conversation. And that's, I was talking about our Great Books program, that's what we do, is we converse. We ask these students questions. Questions are engines of education, you might say. One of the things that conversation does, it doesn't involve just the mind, but it does involve, have you ever gotten emotional in a conversation? Have you ever gotten really angry, really joyful, really sorrowful? Conversation engages all of our, you might say, faculties. And it engages also all the intellectual faculties, not just the memory. You have to use discernment, judgment. You have to learn to ask your own questions. So it engages the entire person. So I wanted, one last note, because we got to truncate this a little bit.
No, you're good.
I mentioned, no, I didn't mention earlier. I mentioned in a little way this, what we might call this poetic approach to education. A wonderful book, by the way, Poetic Knowledge, The Recovery of Education, by Dr. James S. Taylor, an old colleague of ours. God rest his soul. He passed away a couple of years ago. Taught for 10 or 12 years in our Great Books program. It's a wonderful book. You can get it on Amazon. But here's a question for you. What is a star? And I'm not talking about Hollywood. I'm talking about those things in the sky. Really, what if someone asks you, and I'm asking you, what is a star? What do you say about that? What is it?
The suns.
Suns. What is a sun?
Light.
It's a light. Do we know anything else about them?
Energy.
Their energy.
Angels.
What?
Angels.
Angels? Oh, okay. Well, this is interesting. You guys are giving me some of the same answers that I've gotten before, but it usually comes down to, they say, what is a flaming ball of gas? Well, as far as I know, that's true. That's not how I experience it, but I guess that's true. Well, you're all familiar with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? How I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a flaming ball of gas. We experience the stars like diamonds in the sky, don't we? We may also experience them as flaming balls of gas, primarily through a textbook, but there's more than one way to know a star. And what do you think more enriches your students, enriches their lives? Is it to know or to believe that a star is a flaming ball of gas? Or is it better for them, living their human lives, to experience them and know them as diamonds in the sky? One of the reasons we begin each of our Great Books classes with poetry. Poetry tends to enliven, to activate this affective side of the person. It's the true that we often know what we feel before we know what we think. We can know what we feel about something, but not know why. And it's a wonderful way in our classes to begin, to activate the whole person. One last note I'll make here, although I saw Senator Rogers.
It's okay.
She's right.
For a moment.
I can introduce her. She'll be right back.
Oh, okay, yeah, that'd be great if you would introduce her. Pat talked about the age to start the Great Books. We have students, most of our students begin when they're 14, but we have adult students. We've had at least one student in her 80s. We had a retired priest in his 70s. We've got more and more college-age students. But Pat suggested that a 14-year-old won't get as much out of a great book as an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old. And in some ways that's true, but I would make a distinction based on my 23 years in the classroom with the great books. When you're 14, you're living at home, you don't have a full-time job. Hopefully you don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend. You're a student. That's primarily what you do, besides being a family member and all of that. When you're 18, 19, 20, it's not like that. Life isn't like that. You have jobs often. You have more relationships and wide-ranging relationships. And one of the consequences of this is that when our 14-year-old, 15-year-old students, one way, and I'm speaking generally here now, not saying with every individual, one way this makes a difference is their hearts are much more likely to catch fire with a desire to know more of the truth once they experience it. They aren't distracted by all these other things that the older students tend to be. And it's this question of, when we started this, one of the criticisms we got was, 14-year-olds can't read the great books. That's ridiculous. They gotta wait till they're in college. Well, what about scripture? You keep sacred scripture away from your 10-year-olds, your 5-year-olds? It's too deep for you. You won't understand this. You leave the Bible until you're 20. It's an absurdity. I would suggest it's also absurd in regard to the great books. And Christine, turn to you.
Thank you. Before we introduce the next speaker, I just wanted to say to those who are actually watching online at home, thank you. I got 15 text messages on my phone, as you all know. People have the flu and that other thing that's going around. So I'm grateful they didn't show up. So to Angelica, thank you for live streaming this and having it available later. Our next speaker is going to be Senator Wendy Rogers. I think it's fitting that she speaks here today. Not only is she going to start her second term as a state senator, but also she is very pro-ESA, voted for the bill, universal bill, and the one last year as well. And I'm just so grateful that came out of all of our legislature, she came out the most to be able to fight and defend this law with us this past summer up in Flagstaff, here in Tempe, And she's a real fighter for children's education, so we're very grateful to have you in the center, Wendy Rogers.
Thank you, Christine. It's an honor for me to be here with you, and for those of you viewing online, I'm sure we'll have lots of folks following this great concept. It's my honor to be a senator who represents 4 counties that are not Maricopa County. I represent Coconino, Navajo, Gila, and now Pinal County after redistricting. And I can assure you that my constituents are very pro-educational choice. We also attend church here at this Catholic church frequently with our family. Even though we're Protestant, my husband and I, our son and daughter-in-law and 4 grandchildren are Catholic, and so we've been in this hall many times. And that's to say that we're a family of faith, and we homeschooled our son, who attends here, and our daughter, and she lives in Denver. She and her husband have 2 children, so we have 6 grandchildren. And I'm a senator for all of Arizona. And I especially am a senator for families. Because this ESA concept, I can tell you, I have been approached by senators and state reps from all over the country, because I travel and I go to conferences, and they tell me that Arizona is really a beacon of hope and an example set for the rest of the country for educational choice, because empowerment scholarship accounts, ESAs, provide families all across the financial spectrum with choice. And you're looking at a senator who believes in the free market. And the free market is evident in education when you have choice. And so I was asked to sort of chronicle the journey of how we got to where we are, having passed the ESA legislation. So Christine texted me ahead of time and said, Wendy, I want you to tell the audience how we got here. Well, I'm relatively new to the legislature, so I texted 2 of my colleagues who've been around longer than I. And each one of them came back with essentially the same summary, which was this: it's taken many, many years. There were some who, even among conservative circles, who were against it, who had to be worked with, and they eventually did vote for it. In one explanation of all this, it was explained to me that they voted for it thinking that it would be defeated in litigation afterward. So they voted for it to, as we say in the Air Force, look good in the shower. Sorry, I come from a military background. It's a little salty sometimes. I'm an Air Force pilot, was one of the very first women Air Force pilots. Went to training here in Arizona and flew jets nationwide, worldwide. Hal, my husband, in the light blue sweater there, is also a retired Air Force officer, as am I. I'm 5th generation. Our son George, who attends here, was a Marine officer, 6th generation. Of course, he joined the Marines because he said the Air Force was too soft. But all of this is to say that in politics, you'll see a lot of expediency. You'll see a lot of quid pro quo. You'll see, in an extreme, people who sell out, who are bought off. And you say to me, this is the nature of the beast. It may be the nature of the beast, but it's not my nature. And so I stand before you as someone who takes no money from lobbyists. And I think I'm the only one who can say that, even though I'm a robust fundraiser. People who support me, support me because of what I stand for, and that I don't sell out. So back to the education issue, lobbyists approach me sometimes down at the Capitol, and they think I'm this two-horned she-devil, until they realize I'm just the 125-pound grandma from Flagstaff who has kids and grandkids. So we come full circle to where are we with ESAs? We have this wonderful concept in place. We have the great equalizer. We passed it as an example to the nation. And let me talk about the night we passed it. As you all probably know, we passed it by one vote. On the last night of the session, June 24th, which is our granddaughter Claire's birthday. And outside there was this burgeoning, growing crowd of dissenters, because what happened? Roe versus Wade was overturned. So we had this toxic brew of roughly 7,000 people outside the Capitol, building on the late afternoon, during the late afternoon and evening of June 24th. So you had a mixture of pro-abortion and anti-ESA people. Now, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that's a lifetime oath. And I take it very seriously. So here we were, trying to get the people's business done in the Senate building, and these protesters were building up in anger and in fervor outside. And about 8 or 9 o'clock, we still hadn't voted on the ESA bill. And we were all brought into the Senate chamber and told very tersely, we are evacuating you right now out of this building. There is a crowd of protesters outside, and they are about to breach this building. You need to go downstairs, and we're going to go through the tunnel over to the house, where you will be safeguarded. We all crisply looked at one another, asked who was carrying. Oh yeah, we carry. We carry in the Arizona Senate, we carry in the Arizona House. It's been an ages-old tradition. Nobody got flustered. We all went downstairs to the basement offices to get ready to go through the tunnel. And then we were told about 15 minutes later that wouldn't be necessary. So, segue over for a moment to the front of the building. While we were down there waiting, what was going on in the front of the building was our excellent security, Sergeant-at-Arms and his 2 underlings, securing the glass doors on the front of the building with pins underneath so that they couldn't be breached. Very cool-headed presence of mind. If you look on my website, you'll see video clips of them trying to kick the door in with huge numbers of people outside. If that had happened, it would have been disastrous. But these security people kept their heads, put the pins in the door, which they normally do late at night after we're all gone, and kept them out. And then DPS, Department of Public Service, came in and girded themselves for combat. There were about 7, 10, 12 of these individuals in full riot gear, guarding the lobby abreast of each other, whole line. This is all in video clips you can see. They didn't get in. We were protected. What are the lessons from this? Number one, you come at Arizona, you come at State 48, and we're not letting you in our capital. We are serious. We are endowed by the people to get the people's business done, and we're going to get it done. And number two, you didn't hear about it in the news. Interesting, huh? Doesn't fit the narrative. Well, the protesters knew that they weren't going to breach our building. We ended up staying up till 1 in the morning. We got all the bills voted on. By the way, we went back up into the Senate building after the threat had been thwarted, and there was an acrid odor in the Senate chamber of tear gas, which DPS used. That's fine. So we went down to another series of rooms that they opened up, connected, and we manually voted, as in days of yore, standing up and saying aye or nay, and what one's name was and what one's district was. And we finished at 1 in the morning. We passed ESA by 1 vote that night. And so now you're wondering, well, Senator Rogers, where are we now going forward? There is this feeling that we might be in danger of having ESAs infringed upon. I make you this promise, that we in the legislature, it is our job to protect that bill that we passed. We are united and we are resolved to make sure that everything moves forward, irrespective of who the governor is, irrespective of any kind of other action. You have elected us and entrusted us to protect the education of our children and to protect your rights as parents to decide what is best for your children. And I am sworn to uphold that. So I'd like to entertain any questions you might have. And did I cover everything, Christine?
I think so.
Okay.
Are we gonna
She
do
sent
that?
me a laundry list.
Okay, I think we're going to do a panel.
Oh, we are doing a panel. Okay. Yes, I think I covered the recipe there. I'm a senator who knocks a lot of doors, so nothing you ask me will embarrass me or deter me from an answer. I'm all about transparency, so the Twitter files, aren't they fun to read now, huh?
One thing that the senator mentioned about the pro-abortion people being outside, all of the teachers' unions and the anti-ESA people were in the gallery,
Oh yeah, they were heckling us.
heckling and screaming shame and all these things, and they voted anyways. So
Right, and that's the thing. Even though people become loud and vocal and sort of bullying, you can't let that deter you because they hope that you don't respond. And this transcends party or topic or partisanship. The whole thing is, and we want to teach our children this, we must stand for what's right because bullies rely on you being courteous. They rely on you being quiet. They rely on you comporting yourself with dignity. And while we all want to do that, what's more important is that we voice the truth and we voice what's right.
Open for questions. Look at all those hands go up. Questions. We got one?
Prisca in the back.
Oh, way back there. Yeah.
How do we, I have a kid who is diagnosed with a doctor to have vision therapy, but that's not part of the universal ESA coverage. How do we go about obtaining it?
Right now, when it's really, well, the question was, if we have a child who's a universal ESA student who needs vision therapy, how can we get that covered? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. As of right now, the way it's designed is that those with special needs have always been able to get those extra therapies. But those universally, looking again, being on equal footing of what the public school system is offering our children in public schools that I know of are not receiving vision therapy. So that needs to be looked at. I know it's a question that's come up at least 15 times in the past, since universal has passed. But as of right now, the therapies that are covered with ESA are specific to those with special needs. So how can we do that? I don't know if it can be done, but it is on my list to look at when I start.
Along those same lines, if we have a child who has been diagnosed with something and we've contacted the district and the district will not move forward to do a formal evaluation in their eyes because the child does not qualify under their terms, how can I go around that to have those therapy services covered under the ESA, specifically speaking for speech therapy?
Right. To try and encapsulate what you're saying, is if you're trying to get one of your children who's in on universal ESAs to be able to get an evaluation at the public school, if that's not happening, how can you go around that to get that done? That was part of the new legislation, that there would be other things, other opportunities for you to be able to do it. And as far as I remember, and I know the rules are being made by the State Board of Education right now, but as of right now, you would go to the public school, and if they're not doing a good job to your satisfaction, or you can't go there, you would go to for you, Maricopa County Superintendent's Office, and there should be a list of providers who could do the evaluation for you. And if that didn't work, I believe it's the law, the rules say now, you would be able to use your ESA funds to be able to pay for it yourself. But you'd have to find the right person to do it. So there are other options. Those are being fleshed out right now, and that's going to be part of what I helped propose in the new handbook, or how you would go about doing that. But again, I'm not there yet. I'm not the director, but that's one thing that we have to make sure that everyone knows how to do that, every parent. Does that help?
There's a question over here.
Yes, I wondered, we have a little gal that works for us, and they're on a rather restricted income basis, so they accept a grant to educate their child at a religious school, which restricts her ability to earn income. Because if she and or her husband earn, I don't know what the set amount is, but then they no longer give her the grant, it's difficult for her to do both. Would the ESA eliminate that factor, and would it help her? Would it pay the school? She could then work more hours, more income for her family to move forward financially.
Okay. Is the scholarship that she's receiving this tuition tax credit scholarship, or is it a private school scholarship?
Private school.
Okay, so the question is, can you receive a private school scholarship and an ESA at the same time?
Yes, or eliminate one that will pay for the
You can receive any private scholarships you want and have an ESA. What you can't combine is the ESA with the tuition tax credit scholarship, which is also state funds the taxpayer designating that money. You can't do those at the same time. But you can do a private scholarship along with an ESA both. And there's no requirement any longer for zip code or income. Every child who is eligible to go to a K through 12 to a public school will now be eligible for an ESA. She could do both.
She could do both, and also it frees her up to be able to earn more.
Correct. Yeah, it frees you up for a lot.
Yeah.
The best thank you I ever got after this summer was a family that came to me and said, we both parents have full-time jobs. The mom has an extra Etsy shop part-time job. The dad has 2 part-time jobs on the weekend to afford private school. They never see their kids. And so they quit all their part-time jobs only both have each a full-time job, and they spend the weekends with their children again, building up their family. They're having so much fun. There's so much joy brought back to their family because now the ESAs cover their school tuition. That brought tears to my eyes, and that's the reason why we should be fighting so hard for this, because these parents want this for their children, and they've been fighting, and they've been paying taxes, and they've been paying into that system, and it's now time for their children to be able to benefit from it.
So, I'm new to ESA. I'm homeschooling a 5th grader right now, and I have 2 in high school. So I'm a little confused because I thought only ESA was only available for homeschoolers. But my high schooler, who is a freshman, the high school that she's attending to, it's a charter school, and they are refusing to do testing, and we have dyslexia. And so she's a straight A student. So they see no, but she works very hard and is almost in tears when we come back from, I know I'm going to get it again after this fall, winter break. Mom, can you just homeschool me? Because school is hard. And so I'm confused. Can I also get ESC funds for her, even though she attends high school right now full time? It's just, everything is just so confusing to me. And I've homeschooled my kids. My oldest started back in school freshman year. They're at Heritage Academy. And then Camilla started in 7th grade. And then I'm still homeschooling the other one. So I had to take 2 years off. I'm a breast cancer survivor. And so we just kind of, but I love to homeschool. I love to have my kids. There's so much crap that they're dealing with right now. It just breaks my heart. Because it doesn't, even if you go to a really good school, they still are dealing with suicide and the gender stuff and just bullying and everything, even though we have them going to a school that supports the Constitution and upholds the values that my husband and I want for our family. And so I'm just struggling and feel like I'm drowning. And so I am so grateful for all of you guys and your just desire to just push and support us as parents. And so I just wanted to thank you, but I have lots of questions.
Gosh, I have lots of things to say. Is that okay? My gosh, that's why we're here, all of us. Thank you, and thank you for surviving that battle and fighting for it. Your children are important. The ESA is designed to fund anybody who is outside of the public school system because the government's already funding the public school system. So if they go to a public district school or a public charter school, they're not eligible for an ESA. However, and it's K through 12, if you wanted to bring them all home to homeschool them, each and every one of your children would be eligible for universally $7,000 minimum. But if there's a special needs and there needs to be an IEP or even 501, 504 or a MET, any one of those, you can qualify for more because, as I said at the beginning, whatever the state's going to send to your local school district for your child based on special needs or their age, their grade, and the school district would be 90% of that amount. So if you brought her home to educate her, knowing she's in high school, that all can be done for each one of the children. So it's not just for homeschoolers. But if you read the media, it sounds like only homeschoolers are doing this. It's actually for every single student, K through 12. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, and she does have a 504 in place, but they are refusing to test. And so I've been working with the Department of Education, and I'm not getting anywhere with them. Because I was under my understanding is if they are in school, it is the school's responsibility to test the child. I didn't get her tested. I fought for my life for 2 years, and I knew that we had a reading difficulty. I took first grade over because I wasn't reading. And so I knew that she was slow, and I could see how eventually, hey mom, is this how you spell this? So I knew they were going to get there, but they're smart, and she has a little app on her phone, and she puts it over her school book, and it reads to her. So,
Right, similar to the question before, if you can't get the testing done at the school, you can go to the county superintendent, you can go to the county superintendent's office or website. They need to list where you can get it done. And if you can't, you can find somewhere. I want to be able to have in our office a resource to be able to point people in that direction. But if and this is part of the rulemaking process now, if when I become director, the law says, or the rules say, that the department, the ESA office, can provide that person. But I can't imagine having one person for the entire state. Like, you have to meet with the child, and we've got this large state. So what I'm thinking of doing, and I don't know that this will be what happens, but I'm thinking, yes, we'll have somebody there to be able to help in that regard, but trying to point you in the direction into your local area. The public school system is supposed to have that track to test your child and be able to write a MET and an IEP, and that doesn't always happen. So that's why the law, this new law, put that in there, because they know so many parents are waiting 4 or 5 years for this. So help is on the way, I think.
Yes, sir.
Senator, are you anticipating any legal challenges by the incoming governor over the expansion of ESA? Or is this just empty rhetoric?
Without sounding political, we don't know who the incoming governor is going to be yet. I'm just saying. No, I'm just saying. I mean, read some of it. That said, irrespective of who it is, we will do everything we can to ensure that it stays intact. And that means, at least my caucus is very united, and we have the majority, slim as it is, in both chambers of the legislature. I do know there is scuttlebutt out there to move ESAs under a different branch of the state government, and we'll fight that as much as we can. Stay tuned.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, actually, kind of a tactical question. You talked about if there's money left over from your ESA grant, what to do with it. And I had heard some discussion that you could roll it into, say, a 529 plan, which is a federally sanctioned plan, takes it kind of to another, another legislation. Is that true, or where are we at on that?
That was the case for many years, but in 2018, 2019, Senator Brophy McGee had a bill that she was negotiating with both sides of ESA and the union, with the Democrats and the Republicans, and everybody kind of said that's one piece that needed to be taken out. So you can no longer put it into what was called a Coverdale account at the time. That's been disregarded, so that's not part of the law anymore, it was removed. So now, you can still keep it in the educational savings account of the state and just use it for your college, needs afterwards up to 4 years. You just can't roll it over to take it outside of that educational savings account. Yeah, it does roll over year after year, and then you can use it 4 years after high school for post-secondary education.
Just going off of that, are you allowed to use those funds only in-state for state universities, or could you use them for like out-of-state private schools, or does it have to stay in Arizona?
Right, so the question is, can you use that money for college outside of Arizona or inside of Arizona? That's the question of the year. So I know people who are using it outside of Arizona successfully, approved by the ESA office previously in the past. You definitely can use it inside of Arizona. I know one of the State Board of Education members brought it up in the rulemaking process to clarify that of what the intent of the legislature is. So as of right now, I believe you can do both. That's what I think.
I just received, I'm new to the ESA, and I just received my cards this past week. I haven't activated them yet because with the break, I kind of want to wait, because my letter said that once you activate them and everything, you can use them and everything, but there was something that I wasn't aware of, that if you don't use them for a month, there's a fee for not using them, if you don't use them in
Are
the
you talking
month?
about the class wallet credit
The
card?
class wallet, yeah, the
The debit
debit
card, you
card.
Okay, I haven't heard that before. I've had one and kind of hadn't used it for months and months, used it and was fine. So I'm not sure, so I don't know what they're talking about.
Okay.
I would read the details, maybe they changed the parameters of it.
Okay,
I
yeah,
didn't
'cause
know
I
that.
never heard of that before, and I should have brought the letter, I totally spaced, but,
Was
okay.
it the letter that basically says this is your credit card and they want you to call the phone number to verify that you've received it? And then you type in the numbers, is that what you're talking
It
about?
said to activate it, and
Yeah.
then it says, that once you activate it, now you can go use it, and you just,
Right,
just like a
that-
regular.
that's just a standard identification process, that has nothing to do, that's just with any card you get, debit card or otherwise. You're not gonna be able to use it until you actually, I call in and type in the numbers and they verify that it's you.
Mhm.
And that's just for somebody from student and the bank.
It's what?
It's designed to protect you and the bank from having that card stolen by someone else before it got to you in the mail, if you make sense.
Right,
So
right.
activating it now, it's not going to change what you, or it's not going to affect, other than the fact that you need to activate it to use it.
Right, I was just wondering about the $7 fee, that if you don't use it in a month, they'll charge you $7 for not using it.
I'm
So-
not aware that that is, I've never heard that, have you?
I haven't, but I would love to see it because I haven't used mine in many months and I haven't been charged anything.
Okay,
So I'd love to see that.
okay,
Let's look at it.
okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you all sharing your time with us. I have two questions. I'm new to ESA as well. And I signed the documents yesterday after my husband and I read the fine print, just to make sure we're doing everything correctly. I do understand that we, at this point, don't need to do anything with the homeschool affidavit because that can be taken care of because you can't do both, right? However, I need to know the proper protocol to stop attending the charter school. So I know that there's some paperwork I need to do on their end. And if I understand correctly, that's just going to put a pause on the ESA paperwork that I signed until I can prove that I am no longer with the charter school. Is that correct?
Yes, so you received a contract?
Yes.
Okay, so typically, what I've seen is they've not been offering contracts until you're unenrolled in a public school. In fact, many people have gotten denials because they didn't know their children were still on the books, enrolled in a public school. So I'm surprised if that's the case, I'm surprised you got a contract already. I would definitely, with integrity, like you're doing, wait to do anything until they're officially unenrolled and get that in writing, that they're unenrolled, and then you have that to show to the ESA office they're no longer going to the public school.
Yeah, so I guess the interesting thing is that I was not asked, and so I just want to make sure, on my end, morally, I just want to make sure that once I get that document, where do I send it to?
Yeah, I would send it to the ESA office
Okay.
if you have their email.
Okay.
I don't have it because it keeps changing, but I'm sure through a help desk ticket you could provide it. Lots more communication coming in January.
Okay, and then lastly, let's say that I purchase curriculum in the next few weeks, which is what I will do, from Abeka Academy, which is a Christian program, and I hold on to that receipt. I have signed the paperwork for ESA. I just want to make sure that if I don't get, like for example, this young lady has the credit card already and money allotted to different folks. If my money is not allotted until, let's say, a month or two, because things are just getting panned out, if I can still get reimbursed.
When will they be invoicing you for reimbursement?
Well, I'm going to purchase it out of my pocket first, so.
And when did you sign the contract?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Okay, so if you signed the contract yesterday, December. Yeah, I probably would pay after January 1st to be sure, because you're going to be getting funds in the third quarter, and all of our receipts for the second quarter are due by the end of December, and you won't have the ESA funding yet. So if you're able to wait till after January, I think that would be better, because then you have the receipt in the same quarter, you'll be getting funding, and then you have to turn that in by the end of March. So I wouldn't do it now, I would wait till you know, you get an invoice January 1-ish or after, and then do it then.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question pursuant to your situation. Do we have a systemic disconnect between, in her case, a chartered public school and the ESA concept that, if not resolved, could jeopardize the ESA program somehow?
You mean enrollment-wise?
Enrollment-wise, fund transfer-wise?
No, it's coming from two different, like that one's coming from the state budget separately than K through 12 to Department of Education. That sounds a little confusing. I don't mean it that way. It was appropriated differently. So you have to be unenrolled to be able to receive the contract, which is surprising that you're still enrolled and you got the contract. It's kind of surprising. But I think it's, the way they do it is accurate. You have to verify they're unenrolled in a public school to be able to offer an ESA contract. And I know many people who have gotten denial because they're still enrolled in the public school. So that's one. I think it's a clear separation and they're doing it well. I'm just kind of surprised that you received that. The other thing that's a very popular question is, I just thought I'd mention this, can I go to a public school to be part of the football team or the marching band or the art class, all the extracurriculars, and use ESA funds? Yes, you can. You just can't be enrolled in the school as a student full-time with a Canadian student. Average daily minimum for those of you who are in education. You can't be enrolled, but you can receive an ESA, not be enrolled in the school, and then pay that school, like Heritage Academy. You can go there if they have driving classes or something like that. You can use the ESA funds for that. So I just wanted to mention that since that's another popular question as well.
If I could piggyback on that question, so say a homeschool family wants piano lessons. They can use ESA money to pay for piano lessons as long as that piano teacher accepts ESA?
Correct, and that they have a credential. Right now it's written in the handbook, you have to have a certain type of credential. Yes.
Great.
And Christine, I'm just wondering if what the lady in the back signed was the application for ESA rather than the contract.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can hear me back there, but the form that you did sign, was that an application to be part of the ESA to start the process, or was it the actual contract?
I have it here.
It looks like a contract.
It's a contract, yes.
All right, well, good. Sounds like there was a mix-up somewhere.
Okay, we got three, well, she's new, so we'll take hers first.
Okay, sorry. I just was going to speak to that. My son was at a private school, but when I went to enroll him, the school had the responsibility of filing with the state, with the county. And so I signed a paper, I'm not going to school here anymore, and then they had the responsibility to report that to the county.
And I believe they still do for a private school. Homeschool's different, but yes.
So I don't know, public school is different, but when you went to school, to tell them, my kids aren't going here anymore, did you sign anything?
Well, we're a homeschooling family, so.
Oh, you're already
That's the difference,
Oh,
yes.
I see. Okay, forgive me, I'm sorry.
Well, homeschool under charter.
Okay, dark sweater, then you're next, and maybe it's kind
There's one
of...
in the back too.
Oh, another one in the back, too. Okay, good, we got a lot. Go
So I
ahead.
had a comment with her. So the same thing happened with me when I signed up. I signed the contract, but the withdrawal hadn't gone through on the charter school end. And so they just paused my account. Once that went through, they just said, oh, we received your withdrawal from the charter school, you're good to go. So I think it's been happening since Universal started that way. And then my question was, when you made a comment about participating in high school extracurriculars, and I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook about participating in sports in particular, and how some high schools will say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Is that true? Are they allowed to tell you no? Or is that just,
Wonderful question. Like I said before, a lot of people were not pro-ESA. So people just ignored it. It was like the stepchild of the education, unfortunately. And the school districts absolutely can receive the funds. The school can receive the funds for your child to go play sports there. Not be enrolled in the school, just play the sports. So our school board and our wonderful school board members, we have one just elected here today, the communication needs to go out to say, like, you can do this with the ESA funds. And that's the first week I'm there. That's one of the communications I want to go out from our office to the school districts and trickle down to the schools so that they're aware, because they know that they can't have you enrolled in the school and receive an ESA. But I don't think that they're understanding that they could have just done the one extracurricular or sport. Either that or they just don't want to understand it, I don't know, but they'll get a clear communication in January.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, both of them, the same thing happened to me. I signed the contract, she was still enrolled. So the same thing, just like what you guys did. So.
Okay, we have a question way in the back.
So if I am submitting a reimbursement, let's say I'm going and buying 4 books, one for each of my children, on Facebook, which is such a reliable place. It looks like I would need to do 4 separate transactions so that I have 4 separate receipts. Is that what I need to do if I go to a store to buy something? I don't have the debit card, so I just pay out of pocket and then I get reimbursed. That's how I'm just gonna do it for now.
I do believe that's the way you're supposed to do it, per account holder, 1 receipt. However, I know some families that have, again, bought them all together and then they submit them to the state and the ESA office says, no, we have to receive them individually. I think they've made exceptions to like cross everything out, make copies of them, cross everything out and just highlight the one that's for this account and do that. I think that's a little cumbersome. I have to look to see what the requirements would be on the back end of the state that I don't know. But I do know for now, that's the way they're doing it. 1 individual receipt per account holder, per item, or, per purchase, I should say.
And then do you have to submit something off of the curriculum showing that book is part of the curriculum, or
Not for books.
not for books?
Books is one of the things on the long list that they have now that you can just buy all books.
And you can buy them, again, Facebook. So, like, you can buy them at Barnes & Noble, or you can buy them at Target, or you can buy them from Amazon, you can buy them from your store of choice?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know-
Somebody was saying Barnes & Noble wasn't working. They were getting denied Barnes & Noble again.
Probably that would be the debit card. Sometimes that denies at Barnes & Noble. Once in a while, I've heard that happening. And I know you kind of make jest about Facebook, but because there's nowhere else to talk about this is where moms talk. They've got these thousands of people in groups, private and public, and the communication is happening. I'm hoping we can change that culture over the course of 2023 so that it's a relationship with the office and the families.
Yeah, because right now, going on Facebook, it seems super ambiguous, like it's you may or may not get reimbursed for something. And
That shouldn't be, but I know. You may or may not get reimbursed, but hopefully we can change that. When it comes to books, they are reimbursable.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So anything like, okay, along with that, like, yes, you have to, like, for example, my son, we're doing astronomy and everything, so we want to get like a telescope, right? So, but we do like eclectic is what we do, so we're not following, any particular curriculum or anything. So do I have to submit, okay, well, this is what we're doing because we're doing astronomy, so we have to get the telescope approved before we can purchase it?
I always, as a mom, was nervous about approvals on some things, so I just got a pre-approval. I'm hoping that we can kind of set those guardrails a little bit differently, with the new administration, so then that way you have more freedom to purchase things that you're going to need. I know right now you have to submit curriculum and that item has to be listed on it. I think that's how they do it now. That could change, I don't know. But as long as you're buying something that's educational for your student, that's the most important. If it goes out over a certain dollar amount, you might have to think twice before maybe, like I said, we're not doing pool construction for swimming lessons, right? But obviously that's within it.
See me after class, I got a telescope I'll give you.
Hey.
Okay, yes ma'am.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what about blanket items things that are all students need. So for example, at the public school, you know, they probably have access to Microsoft Office or a typing infrastructure or Adobe. If I were to choose that for my high schooler, because we know he needs to learn Excel and he has to use it for projects, etc., do I have to prove that he has to have it for class, or that he's just in the 9th grade and he needs it?
That's a great question. The legislature put in the law that hardware is something you can do, computers, calculators, devices, things like that. Software has never been permitted, and I don't know that it ever has been, but I don't know why. So that's one of my hundreds of questions when I get there, to meet with the attorney to ask why. Because you can't write a paper for school on the computer the legislature just lets you buy if you don't have Word. I guess you could do something that's free or something, but I totally understand. And that's one of my many questions. I don't know why it's not been allowed, but there might be a good reason that I'm not sure, so I'm gonna look into it.
I have two questions, one regarding ESA and the other for the Angelicum program. So the first one regarding the ESA, I'm just wondering what's the kind of turnaround time for a dance program or a studio to be to apply to be a vendor, so then we can make payments using the ESA? Like, what's the turnaround time for that?
Right now, it's astronomical. The turnaround time is quite a long time to become a vendor, even to be reimbursed as a parent. And I think that's just because there's so much backlog. I don't know what the new turnaround time will be, but I can promise it'll be shorter. Is Angelicum as a vendor, correct? How long did it take you? Well, you did it early on, but how long did it take you to set up as a vendor?
Well, we started in August and didn't think we had heard anything from them for several weeks. So I finally checked in and it's like, well, we denied one and we granted the other because we couldn't get a hold of you by phone, which is okay. I don't know where that came from because I'm there by the phone all the time. So anyway, they denied, so I had to restart one completely. The other one had been approved by Arizona and somehow been lost in the ether at Class Wallet. So once I called Class Wallet several times, they found us. And we got listed right away on that one. And then I started the process anew with Arizona ESA. The difficulty, to be honest with you, was several times Arizona ESA, I would contact them and the person that responded would not respond with a name or phone number. And it was a very terse, if you will, abrupt email that simply said, not my problem, we approved it on such and such a date 2 weeks ago and sent it to Class Wallet, talked to Class Wallet. And I talked to Class Wallet and Class Wallet said, well, we don't have it. And then they did a little further digging and finally said, oh no, we found a comment from one of the ESA persons that approved it or said they approved it, that it was denied because they couldn't reach you by phone to confirm your website or some sort of detail that they needed to confirm. It all got sorted, but the bottom line is it took us until probably early October to be confident that we actually were listed as a direct pay vendor. The other problem is Class Wallet does not regularly update their list of vendors on the public side of their website. They do when you're logged in as a parent, it's a current list. But if you're just an outside vendor trying to see if you're in the club, so to speak, they just updated their list, I think, just last week. And it hadn't been updated until, I think it was September. So for parents trying to verify that the vendor is there, unless you've got a Class Wallet or a ESA portal account and then a Class Wallet account, you're not going to know. But it can go faster, and the way I learned to make it faster was on the last go-round with one of the organizations, was I just stayed on top of it. I submitted it that very day. I sent an email to ESA. I sent an email to Class Wallet and I said, I've submitted it. I know it's at the Arizona ESA office. I'm waiting to hear. And then the very next morning, as soon as I could, one of the tricks I've learned, call that ESA line as soon as it opens. I said, did you get it? And is it approved? Yeah, we got it, it's approved. So then I hung up and I called Class Wallet. They said that it's approved. Where is it? 15, 20 minutes. Finally, I found someone, finally Class Wallet, who was nice. She called me out of the blue saying, you got your application. I said, oh great, what's your name? What's your phone number? And she's on my direct dial. Yeah. And anyway, that one went really fast because I stayed right on top and didn't wait for a second to elapse. And so, lesson learned for us, And for any other vendor out there, that's probably what you have to do, is you just have to say motherhood and apple pie. Make sure that thing gets through all the wickets and gets done. And if there's a snafu, start making the calls and sending emails.
And that is definitely going to change with the new administration because it's unacceptable. And we'll run this professionally. Every single email that you'll get from the ESA office, starting the day after I start, will have the person's name on it, and it will not be ambiguous. You're going to run this professionally, because that is unacceptable, and I've got those emails for years. It's not going to
And it'll have a happy face on it.
And so the second question has to do with the Jonathan Kevin. So I have a daughter who's going to be a junior next year, or at the end of next summer. And so right now she's thinking about different summer programs, and she thinks she wants to pursue the legal route, get an idea of the law. And you mentioned the Great Books program. I'm wondering if there's a short course or something that you can offer that maybe includes some of those great books that are kind of suited for certain topics relating to law.
U.S. Code.
Yeah, we offer a summer program each year. I don't know where it'll be this year exactly. It was in Colorado Springs previously we did. However, there's a difference. They can't get college credit for it because it's too short, not sufficiently long. So yes, she can be introduced to the great books with about 50 other students. It's a wonderful way to do it. It's a very unforgettable experience for them. We don't just study the great books. You know, we go around like we went to Chocolate Pie Peak and Flying W Ranch and all the other things, you know, on the same days. But it's a great way to introduce them to it, and they'll understand that it's not just simply taking up dry books and reading endlessly. That's not all.
Were you asking if we had a truncated academic program that lasts just over the summer?
More of like, I like the answer about the summer program, but also just wondering if there's like a short menu of maybe like short courses that she might find interesting. If there are certain topics, or if there's any that you can recommend that might relate.
Well, maybe we could see you after the thing. We don't have such a course. We do we begin with the Greeks, they're foundational, and we do the four-year program for high school age students. College age students often do it in 2 years. They'll do the Greek and Roman years at the same time. High school students have too many other mandatory courses they have to get through. But we do them chronologically, so we don't divide them up by subject. It's an integrated course. It's really all of life in the great book. So, but I would say Pat's probably the one to talk to afterwards. You might be able to suggest a few books for someone focused on the law as a career.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. No, I mean, yes, sir, to him. I can tell you.
I was wondering if a parent uses the debit card to purchase an item that has an MCC code, after they've purchased that, do they have to submit the receipt for approval?
Not for approval, but it will be audited, yes.
Okay,
But you'll definitely submit. You can use the debit card to purchase something. You take the receipt, invoice, saying it's paid, and then you upload it.
And then you upload it, okay. So they still have to upload it if they use that and it
Yes.
has an MCC code? Okay, thank you.
All right, we're going to have to end the questions for the formal part of this because we have to take all this down. We have to be out by 4 o'clock, so we have to tear down. But Christine said she'll be here till Christmas Eve to get the questions. So, but thank you, Senator, very much for being here, making the effort, and giving us your time here today. Christine, of course, thank you very much. I'll see you later.
And thank you to Angelica for today.